So welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders on some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 76, which is a really incredible group chat that we just had with Viveck Kumar, who's a VP of product at PropertyGuru. So PropertyGuru is Asia's leading online home marketplace that's used by millions of property seekers to find homes every month. Vivek is also a thought leader on low-frequency consumer products and marketplaces, which he's previously shared some incredible posts about. So this is a really incredible group chat, as I mentioned, with Viveck, where we got to learn more about his experience leading product at PropertyGuru. More on it is the leading home marketplace in Asia. We did a deep dive right into low-frequency marketplaces and how to grow them with the presentation that he actually walked us through, and had a really great Q&A for those on the chat. So I really enjoyed it, and I know you're going to find a great watch to the end. So Vivek, welcome to the group chat. It's definitely great to have you join us here today. So I'm really glad that Ravi initially connected us, and he spoke very highly of you and your experience. And he also mentioned that you're the go-to person on low-frequency marketplaces. So really excited to chat about it here with you. Before we jump into things, though, I think it'd be great if you could start off by sharing a little bit more on your background for those that don't know you.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike. As Ravi had put down, I had introduced us. I've spent almost a dozen years now looking back, managing infrequent products. First at PayPal, then with TurboTax, and currently with PropertyGuru. I'm excited to learn a bit more about Apartment List from Katrina as well. And besides that, I used to run my own startup, which was again an infrequent one, which is called Alum Club, which is about connecting alumni with the educational institution, which I find is a big problem which has not been solved as yet. So yeah, I think I've got, if you look at my career, I think one of the things I realize is when you go and fill up a drop down, that's when possibly you know how aged you are. You keep searching for your first job, and then it scrolls down. And then there are three parts to my career. The first part was more about startups. A lot of scar tissues. Launched the first online gaming in India with $40 million funding. We failed. Launched the first ad tech platform in India, much similar to DoubleClick at that point in time. This was way back in 2007-8. We didn't do well because we were just into the midst of recession in 2008. And then from there, I took refuge in the bigger companies, PayPal, Amazon, and Intuit. And finally, a scale-up story where we 5x the revenue in the last 4 years with PropertyGuru. So 6 years been here. PropertyGuru, for those of you who don't know, is kind of Zillow for Southeast Asia. So we present across 5 countries, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. So it's exciting growing a business back here in Southeast Asia.
Certainly, and that's some pretty incredible experience. I feel like, we could just go on for the whole hour just about, your some of the previous companies like PayPal and, Intuit and whatnot. But if we do go back to, PayPal and Amazon and Intuit, what are some of those kind of like learnings through that time period that you initially learned there that you've then taken with you, to now at PropertyGuru?
Yeah, so very interesting. So when I joined Amazon India, this was way back in 2013. We were supposed to launch in as a retailer in the country. And then the government rolls in a requirement saying that no longer retailers are allowed, online retailers are allowed, because that might just eat up the small and medium businesses. So you can only be a marketplace. So we scrambled to launch a marketplace in 4 months flat in India, and that was a backbreaking work. But what I realized about Amazon, and at the same time, there were other competitors who were also kind of pivoting the business model from retailers to that of a marketplace and launching it. But what was incredible about Amazon is the principled approach that we took to the market. So I'll give you an example. So one of the principles that we talked about was quality of sellers is more important than quantity of sellers. That's kind of the launch principle that we had. So the way we went about the launch was we ended up doing prospecting sellers, and we did mystery shopping on them. We kind of shipped their items in 3 different places: easy to receive, medium hard to receive, hard to receive. We scored them, and then we onboarded the sellers onto the platform. The flip side of this was the flip side of this approach was that you couldn't onboard too many sellers because it's like time intensive, effort intensive. But you know that you had quality sellers on your platform when you launched. And so while the competitors focus on quantity of sellers, we were just going with a handful of sellers in a selected category, and that's how we launched. What's incredible was after our launch, the kind of customer trust that we gained with the seller's performance was way ahead of how competitors used to perform, where let's say you ordered for a phone and you will receive a brick instead, because e-commerce was just fledgling at that point in time. Indian sellers were not very tuned to e-commerce. So that was one interesting approach that Amazon took, which has always stayed with me. Very clear principles in how we manage systems. The second thing I recall is also that I think it's the second day of our operations, or third day of operations. So one of the customer calls up and complains that, hey, I bought a DSLR camera from you, and then in this DSLR package, I don't have the lens, I've just got the body in here. And what's incredible about that company again is how principle driven they are. So when there's a dispute between a customer and seller, customer wins, period. I think that solved for countless decisions and meetings that would have transpired if it was another company. So what we decided is we refunded the customer, we put them on a watch list, we put the seller on a watch list, and the business moved on. I think that company is a well-oiled machine when it comes to principles, and there's a tons to learn from Amazon when it comes to how do you run marketplaces. The third and the most important thing about Amazon is also about the focus on inputs of the business. Everybody knows the flywheel that is very famous, and it's incredible to sit on what you call as the WBRs, which is their weekly business reviews, and see that there's no mention of revenue whatsoever. All they're focusing is do you have the right selection? Is at that point in time we used to call this ODR, is your order defect rate under control? So I think that's an incredible way of measuring the performance of the business. So that's Amazon for me. In terms of PayPal and Intuit, I have a very common lesson, and that's a bit of counterintuitive stuff. And it's kind of a controversial one also, what I'm going to say. In my days at Intuit, I've never seen a company like that which worships customer. They're just poster people, if you were to see, in terms of how one should be very customer empathetic. So they have this, for people who may not, you guys, if you're not familiar about this, there's this thing of follow me home and follow me office. And if you're familiar about that, we actually go into the home of the users, TurboTax users, sit next to them, observe them as to how they do it. What's interesting about, and there's another one which is called Lifeline event, where the entire company, so if you go to San Diego, everybody's in the pantry for 3 days, just attending the customer problem, right from the VP to the associate product manager, across all departments, marketing, sales, and what have you, all of them sitting down and addressing customer queries. So those 3 days of customer immersion gives you phenomenal insights, and you walk out with a bit of pride and head high, saying that, oh, I've solved X amount of queries for customers, and so on and so forth. But what I've seen is, in spite of all of these things, Intuit's flagship products are still the two that they created in 1990s, which are TurboTax and QuickBooks. And that begs the question, why? Like, your playbook across the world says that, solve customer problems, and then you will be a very successful, you can launch successful product. But my experience in Intuit kind of gave me, upon reflection, I was always thinking as to why is that this company couldn't crack anything beyond that. Again, just to be sure, Intuit is a fantastic company. It's a great company. It's just that, have they landed the next big thing besides TurboTax and QuickBooks? The answer is no as yet. Similarly, if you look at PayPal, PayPal is another company which is still running on its idea, which started in 1990, of transferring payments between two persons in a secured way. That's still running the company. We did a bunch of stuff during my stint there. We tried doing digital currency in 2009 because Second Life was big. I don't know if you guys have heard of, are exposed to Second Life. We tried launching it, didn't go too well. We tried doing this aspect of one of the issues that we had is students, when they wanted to get money transferred from their parents, it was taking almost 2 to 3 days. We tried solve that problem. That product doesn't exist anymore. We tried serving the underbanked and unbanked customers, didn't serve help anymore. So this whole theory, if you look at it, solve the customer problems and you will launch a successful product. I have a perspective against it.
That's really interesting to hear. So, I would love to learn more about from there, like your transition into a property guru. So what led you to joining the property guru team?
Yeah, so my experience was primarily focused in the US and a bit of Europe, and I've never dabbled with Southeast Asia. At that point in time, I had some interesting opportunities come my way, and out of those, when I met with PropertyGuru folks, it was very different at that point in time. It was kind of startup-ish in Singapore. It was a founder-led company at that point in time when we joined. But I liked the people, I liked what I saw there, and I felt like that's a right move for me. And especially about learning about Southeast Asia, it was also in the infrequent space. So all of these things kind of made me join them. And the ride has been phenomenal, because I think a couple of things that has happened is, one, transition was founder-led to professional-led management. So that transition happened, and it was incredible to witness through the front seat. So I'm part of the exec team in PropertyGuru. So it was good to see and witness those changes. The second thing was, we were extremely sales-led. And so that pivot from sales-led to being product-led, I've heard this so many times in the conversations, but what it is really, when you're in the thick of things, it's a very different journey. But we are successful in navigating this in terms of where we were and where we are right now. And the third thing that you read on the books, which sounds extremely easy but super hard to do, is this output to outcome translation. I think it's much more easier to read in the books. Like, for instance, I'll tell you, I slapped a bunch of goals for my PMs, and a couple of them left after a year because they didn't know how to. If you've never been trained, and if the ecosystem around you, it's just not your company, but the ecosystem is not very outcome oriented, you're going to have a heavy task of taking PMs, nurturing them to see how to visualize a goal and march towards it, and then getting them there. That's kind of a experience that for us, it took almost, that transition took almost close to 2 years. And finally, I'm glad to see the dashboards with outcome metrics, and saying that we are, like, the latest one I was reviewing was, we are 112%, one of the metrics that we wanted to hit through. But that was not a conversation that we had 5 years back when we joined. So that is a interesting transformation from where we started.
Yeah, that might lead to some questions here from Katrina chiming in here when we get to the Q&A. I definitely want to jump into some topics as far as, like transitioning from being sales led to product led as far as growth. But before we do, it might be a little bit helpful if you can kind of give us like an overview though of PropertyGuru as a marketplace, and maybe kind of touch on some of the unique aspects of it too.
Yeah, so PropertyGuru as a marketplace is a highly infrequent product, which is on properties. I see my customers once in 10 years or once in 7 years, and the rental customers come to me every 1 and 2 years to 4 years, depending on how they want to turn out the rental. So we are, as I said, we are present in 5 markets. What's interesting is, and we are honored to be in a position where we are the leading marketplace in 3 out of these 5 markets, which is basically, if across Southeast Asia, we're the leading prop tech. But if you were to look at it again, the 5 markets, Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, we are the market leaders, and Indonesia and Thailand is an emerging story for us. So that's kind of interesting as to, we started in Singapore and then pervaded into the rest of the country. So what made us go through is that I think the fundamentals of marketplace matters a lot here, which is just about focus on liquidity, ensure that your coverage is intact on the supply side, and ensure that your liquidity of demand is intact. And I think that is all you need to get the flywheel spinning. As long as you can create this in one city and multiply this across multiple cities, you kind of nailing the game. So if I were to just put this in a simple framework or simple playbook, before I joined, we were actually leaders in Singapore. And And post the team transition, then we kind of got into Vietnam, and then we were able to secure the position in Malaysia as well. But what made us extremely successful in Singapore was just that the value was provided, and the value was provided just through liquidity of supply and demand. It's as simple as that. So if I were to architect this for you, I call this internally, the core purpose of our marketplace is matchmaking. We're much like Tinder, to be honest, where one consumer dates multiple properties, and one property dates multiple consumers, eventually then for them to matchmake. And the question is, how do you solve the match? How do you improve the match rate as a platform? So we have 5 ladders that we look at from a product perspective, which helps us get there. So we acquire the right listings and the right consumers. We ensure that the quality of the listings are good and the quality of consumers. What I mean by quality of consumers are we kind of ensure that we know what the consumer really wants, what their preference is. The third is, how do we enable discovery of consumers of the right listings. Fourth is, we give them an insight around, okay, so Mike was able to, let's say, find the property of his choice. We knew what Mike really wanted, and that was available on the property. And then I'm giving Mike all the discovery tools like search and recommendation engine to find the property. And the fourth is, when Mike is staring at a property, how do I convince him that this is the right thing for him to, or not the right thing for him to do? So we give pricing insights, location insights for Mike to take a decision on whether this is the right property to go or not. And all throughout the journey, we ensure that the retention is in place. That's kind of the architecture we look at. So our core North Star is match rate, and that's what we've solved towards. Now, look, I think besides this, I can just touch upon another thing. Now, what makes a property market very interesting is, in my days of PayPal, what I've realized is scaling the platform is it is hard, but it is relatively easy, because the front end of PayPal, whether you work from US or you from India or Australia, it's going to look the same. The back end is where we do a bunch of heavy lifting with compliance and risk management and so on and so forth. With PropTech, it's not so. My 5 markets are a bit different. In Singapore, it's very regulated. It's much like the US. You've got best-in-class data, you've got best-in-class agent, but in Thailand and Indonesia, it's very fragmented. It's unregulated. People come in and go as agents. So how do you then create a product that can scale across markets is a big question.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about that. How the markets might be kind of nuanced individually. So is the product experienced? Is it does it differ across the markets, and you basically run multiple marketplace properties for that, or?
Right. So we try standardize this as much, except for Vietnam. We pretty much have Vietnam, as I said, has a very different nature with a lot of people coming in and going. We don't have a very steady pool of agents. For the rest of the markets, we've kind of standardized as much as possible. And that's one of the issues that you might find as a product leader, as to when you have different market nature, how do you then pick up and solve this? But the good thing about this is it's eventually all PropTech, most of the PropTechs across the world, if you look at it, it's a winner takes all market. If you do the work, then pretty much you end up being on the winning side of the market. But yeah, so scalability in terms of the market homogeneity doesn't exist, and that creates sometimes frictions in terms of scale.
Got it. Yeah, thanks for sharing with us on that. So you definitely have you're at quite the scale. So what is your team like, and like the org structure?
Yeah, so I think what would be helpful for this is just to give you the philosophy of my org structure as against. The current team is almost 60 people big. So there's the designers, the researchers, and product managers who report into me. But the way we are divided and where we are structured is there are 2 parts. We are now focused in terms of customers, which is let's say consumers, agents, and property developers. But and that's the verticals that you'll see in me. And then within that, what you're going to see is also that outcome orientation in terms of the product teams. So I'm a big fan of. So as I said, the transition was towards outcome. it took us a bit of time. So what I decided was there's no one good way of designing org for your business. But what I favored was much more around outcome oriented. So if you look at my consumer team, they have a traffic team, we have a retention team, and we have a conversion team. All of them have clear outcomes. The flip side of this is you will have them working on conflicting assets. For instance, retention team might be running an experiment on my search, whereas conversion team might be also running an experiment on search, which is fine. But that's a trade-off that you're doing in terms of outcome orientation. And that has served us well. And we've continued that org structure for quite some time. What's very interesting is in our initial days, however, this structure did not, it was a bit of strain for us, because if you, depending on the context of the business, my thinking is, if you're like in the early stage, I would lean more towards feature-based org structure as against outcome-based org structure. And as you scale up, outcome-based org structure makes sense. What we've also done recently is also pivoted into HQ and local teams. So there's a headquarter teams which kind of regionally scales products. So we manufacture once in, let's say, Singapore or Malaysia, and we scale it to other markets. And there are local teams which just do local specific initiatives. Like, for instance, in Thailand, people like to search with their local Thai names when it comes to location. That's a very peculiar to Thailand. Or Indonesians have their own eccentricity. So we've now got a local teams which can then take care of that.
So, that's a little bit more about, PropertyGuru and then, the org structure and whatnot. So what is your, your day-to-day like kind of as a VP of product?
The day-to-day is pretty much set. So one of the things that we like in PropertyGuru, what we do in PropertyGuru is that we are a strong believer in terms of the rhythm of business. So my Monday pretty much starts with half a day with all the execs, where we kind of come together to review all the key projects in the market. And then there are specific rhythm that we have found. So what is very interesting about this, the rhythm is businesses, in this new pandemic world with teams being distributed and remote, we're still experimenting and finding out what's the right level of async approach versus sync approach. And I don't think there's any formula to it. There's a third level of experimentation right now going on between us in terms of what's the right mix, like which are the meetings that you really want to be on face-to-face, which can be done absolutely async. So one of the muscles that we built recently was about also creating documentation. That's the new kind of muscle that you need in this remote world. So if you come back to my day-to-day, so apart from the exec meetings, I have 3 check-ins with the teams over the week on various aspects of, are we looking at, are we committing to the roadmap, whatever commitments that we have for the goals, is it going well? I just have my one-down meetings for the product leadership, and also the sprint reviews, just to have, that's my way to be a little more hands-on as to what is happening in the teams. Besides that, we also operate what we call as a steerco, like where teams bring, every week I'll have at least 2 steercos where I'm part of decision-making body. Either I'm soaking in information that the team is giving me, or they will be asking for decisions about certain aspects where we decide and say that this is the way you go about it. So that's kind of my week laid out for you. But it's intense and interesting.
Yeah, I can only imagine how intense it is. So, yeah. So now moving on to a topic which I'm really excited to jump into, and I know I shared your previous post, about the ICE theory, which you basically kind of mapped out, infrequent products and marketplaces, and it prompted quite a few questions. So I definitely want to make sure we could take time to kind of cover that and go into some detail on it here today on the chat. So I'd love it maybe if you could kind of like walk us through, that post.
I'd love to. I'll possibly share with you a bit of the material around how infrequent products work. And I don't think ICE theory as a whole is a long, is a long one. I don't think we have the time to cover it. So what I'm going to do is possibly focus on I of ICE theory, give you a bit of perspective around ICE theory, and just go around the I of ICE theory. everyone knows that infrequent products are basically those like property purchase and car purchase, travel, medical. And if you actually think about it, there are a ton of infrequent products that we actually buy. You don't buy a Kindle every day. You buy Kindle once in a while. And Eventbrite is something that you don't go every day. Bose, again, you don't do every you go. I mean, when I was actually writing this, and that's when I realized the amount of impact that you have on infrequent products on a day-to-day life. I gave my overview already. PropertyGuru, PayPal, TurboTax. Besides that, I was also running an alumni education platform alumni networking platform for educational institutions. That was a bit of infrequent product as well. But just getting into the deep of things, the real problem that you find with infrequent products, it's pretty hard to manage. You have a weak recall now that you're not going to be a part of the system. Like, for instance, one of the things that we struggled in TurboTax is, okay, this guy came and filed taxes and he left. I'm going to see him next year. How do I stay top of mind so that he comes back to me next time? So the other thing is also ensuring viability is a challenge. So, and Andrew Shen had this had this really nice blog post. This was written way back, but he said dating platforms don't get funded because the LTVs to CAC matching that is pretty hard. They come once in a lifetime, and maybe they'll renew their subscription twice or thrice. So how do you then match this with their CAC is a big question. And the third thing is, given that transactional products, your valuation is largely subject to margins. So how do you drive margins, especially when you're going to spend a volume in terms of acquisition, or you have problems with monetization and increasing the LTV of the customers? So low frequency products don't appeal to everyone in the market. So one of the things that I talk about is that if you see, there are two traits of low frequency products, which is basically they're not applicable to everyone at any time. So if you're looking for a job, example, or a house or a dating, not that your friend will be also dating, or they'll be looking for a house, or they'll be looking for a job as well. So the core of the referral loop or the viral loop that essentially exists with respect to the other side of the products, which is the entertainment products, the social networking products, that is largely not applicable here. The frequency products largely work on some kind of a referral loop or viral loop. Here, word of mouth does exist, but the rest of them are very difficult because it's not very penetrable in the market. So if you look at it, the infrequency is essentially a spectrum. You're talking about Zillow on one side, which is on high infrequency, Expedia on a low infrequency. So this happens probably once in 8 years or 10 years in the market. Expedia could be once in 3 months, 6 months in a market. So for the context of this theory, what we've defined as anything infrequent is something that it's happening less than once in 3 months, because that I feel is the window where it's forgettable zone. It could be also argued that anything less than a month is also could be treated that way. The other thing is about creating opacity. Like, I have the same problem with PropTech, and the dating sites also have the same thing, which is when you go out on a date, you really don't know what's happening on the date. And no matter what's your best-in-class ML algorithm in terms of recommendation engine, without knowing what's really transferring in the outside world, it's difficult for you to tweak your algorithms to serve them better. So if you're looking at the control of experience, there are products like TurboTax, which has got complete control over experience, versus Indeed, where you don't have any, apart from discovering job, you really don't know how the job interview transpired, how the candidate experience was. All of these things happen outside of the platform. Let me know if I'm talking a bit too fast. If you want me to reduce the speed, I'm happy to do that. Katrina,
this is great. Now we're getting like a little workshop here on it. So I love it.
All right, cool. So look, I think this is a bit of, if you were to look at it across 3 platforms, like for instance, if you're looking at complete closure of transactions, there are things like TurboTax, which is a SaaS product. You have Opendoor, which is a marketplace. You've got eBay, which is an e-commerce, or Allbirds, which is an e-commerce, PayPal, which is on fintech. All of these things have complete experience. But on the other spectrum, you see dating sites like Match, which doesn't have complete experience. Your Your SaaS tools like Shutterstock, which you, assuming that you're a consumer, not the agency, you go once in a while, you're not using Shutterstock every day in your life, possibly when you're making presentations and what have you. And similarly, things like Skyscanner, where again, you do some kind of a retailing, but a lot of the experience actually happens outside of the platform. That's kind of the lay of the land for you as to how different products are there in the market. So the third dimension of this is, we talked about I, which is infrequency, C is control over experience, and the third is engagement. The more infrequent you are, the better it is, the more important it is for you to focus on engagement. Because if you don't focus on engagement, it may result in poor recall, poor retention, and hardly any word of mouth. So later in the engagement section, you would hear me talk about, basically in the article also I would have covered that there are two types of products, especially in the engagement world. So there is one with a predictable retention where you know that people are going to come back. So if Mike is a TurboTax customer, I'm pretty sure that he's going to come back next year, or at least I know that he's going to file taxes next year. So there's a bit of predictability on retention. Whereas when you're looking at a job, it is very hard for me to say when Mike is going to start looking out for a job, right? So that's kind of the two worlds. And it's important that you employ the right strategy to bring them back. If there's a predictable retention, how do you bring them back? If there is a non-predictable retention, then what are the other strategies you employ to get more word of mouth for your product? So again, so if you were to look at this, there is this spectrum of high engagement, which is when you're buying a car, you're more involved. When you're choosing a vacation on Airbnb, you're more involved. Versus when I'm sending money, I'm not that engaged, right? I'm just sending this. It's kind of no-brainer for me. So engagement by itself for infrequent products has three dimensions, which is complexity. So Zillow is extremely complex. PayPal is simple. I call this thing called touch. Touch is basically how much is the product in constant touch with you, because then it reinforces the experience. So example, TripAdvisor is something that you visit only when you're traveling. Whereas when you buy something from Stitch Fix, you wear it every time you wear it and someone compliments you, that is getting reinforced on you again and again, unlike TripAdvisor, which is touch and go. And the third one is a bit of predictability of retention, which I spoke about. Indeed is unpredictable. TurboTax is much more predictable. So if you know that complexity is a spectrum, then how do you look about this? So the point here is, the higher the complexity, the more you need engagement. So example, categories like property, dating, and car, where there's a high involvement, you need, whereas there's a degree of complexity, you need a higher degree of engagement. So in the second part of the article, you would find that there are some strategies illustrated. We'll not get into the deep depth of it. Some of these things will be covered as part of the Reforge course, but you will see me tease around how do you then look at high involvement products, especially, and how do you then dial up the engagement there. So yeah, so there are products like single touch to constant touch, which I spoke about. Again, like if you're looking at Bose, and every time you're hearing this music from Bose and it's just delighting you, or although you buy Bose once in a while, the question is, how can you move towards constant touch? And that's something that we illustrate later in the ICE theory as to how do you move from single to constant touch. Similarly, Nike, let's say you're wearing these shoes for running and you're liking this as you do your sports or running, and then that's another way of constant reinforcement of the brand there. Yeah, the last thing is about predictability of retention, and so highly infrequent product. So if you're a better.com, and if you're not familiar with better.com, that's basically one of the they are a mortgage refinancing platform or financing platform, to put it. And there it's again, there's a degree of unpredictability as to when someone, let's Katrina, is going to remortgage a home. So the higher the infrequency and the retention is unpredictable, that's something that you need to go out and solve for. That's a big problem, and you need to find a way to manage that. So just some bit of clarification before I go down this further, right? So there are too many concepts here, so I just wanted to put that home. So when a customer comes in from here to point X, then that's the customer lifetime value. Meaning, let's say a person is coming to file a tax with TurboTax over 5 times. So 5 into whatever money that they're paying, that becomes a customer lifetime value. And this concept of making sure that they come every time, every year to pay the taxes for you is what I call as the lifetime retention. Because the concept of retention is very ill-defined with the infrequent products. So I've just taken the liberty of giving some nomenclatures around how this works. Then every time when you're coming in to do your taxes, let's say it takes you 10 sessions to do your taxes, that 10 sessions is what you call as active retention. So you might just drop off after doing the first 2 sessions. So how do I bring you back to ensure that you're culminating the transaction this time is what I call as active retention. And the frequency is times when you come to the product, especially to do possibly how many times you're coming to the product, not just for doing the core transaction, but it could be something else. So for instance, one of the things that we've always dabbled in TurboTax is, can we help people with their financial planning? That's one of the things that we've been trying to do. And so let's say this guy is coming in so many other times to do financial planning. That's a frequency we're talking about. So there's frequency, there's lifetime retention, there's active retention, all of them helping us to improve the customer lifetime value. And the last thing is about distinctive. When we were researching for this, what's incredible is Airbnb, which is very distinctive, has almost like 70% of their traffic, which is organic traffic. That's incredible position to be. Whereas Expedia has close to around 42%, sometimes in hot market even further, which is just paid traffic. I mean, that gives you a comparison about how much one needs to acquire a traffic for the brand in the same space. Yeah, and Airbnb, given its distinctiveness, is able to attract a lot of traffic organically. So I think distinctive for me, one of the examples that comes to mind in terms of high infrequency is Reforge. They've done a pretty good job. I don't know if Guillermo or Katrina are part of Reforge right now, but I think they've done an incredible job of turning around a non-frequent product like education, which Coursera and Udacity, and they're still in that format to something of a subscription-based format. And they've also laid in a whole bunch of use cases which makes them distinctive. Like, for instance, what they are good for is that they bring in all the industry experts, the VPO growth of Instacart or Instagram. They're all writing on Reforge, and that makes you much more distinctive against other platforms. And which means definitely there's a cost of acquisition and other benefits that they will be enjoying. So that's kind of basically the ICE framework. Yeah, so there's infrequency, there's control over experience, there's engagement, and there's distinctiveness. All of them together, what I call is the ICE theory. And ICE theory is complex. I mean, if you look at it, there's a whole bunch of strategies that underpins each one of these things that I've said. But today we're going to largely focus on infrequency right there. So one interesting point is this guy, Richard Barton, that you're seeing on the screen, is the one who is kind of a pioneer in terms of doing these products, be it Expedia, be it Zillow right now, or for that matter, Glassdoor. So the cue of making an infrequent product much more frequent was taken from him. And so he has got a lot to play with some of the thinking that is underpinning the next few slides. So yeah, so then if these are the 4 dimensions, what's our strategy? The strategies go from left to right. So infrequent to frequent, no control over experience to control over experience. If there's a low engagement, go towards high engagement. If you're non-distinctive, go towards much more distinctive approach. So one thing I want to drive home before we go forward is that this is how you measure retention for product market fit for your frequent products. So let's say your Instagram, you have a low product market fit, you do a bunch of fixes, the retention improves, that becomes medium, and then eventually becomes high. That's how your product market fit is looked at. Whereas for infrequent products, it's about penetration. So if you have low penetration, then look at medium penetration and high penetration. So I think I've shared the first blog of mine is out. And there I've given a framework as to how to think about product market fit and draw a line in the sand. And I think another issue that I have with the product industry is also that we have too many notional concepts like 10x, MVP, product market fit, and different people have different notions of what that really means. I'm very uncomfortable with this. And for me, if that term is getting floated around a bit, I mean, if it's a part of our everyday language, then it's important that you have some kind of definition. So feel free to check out my blog where I've got low frequency products.substack, where I've got a method by which we can draw a line in the sand for infrequent products, product market fit. And so the key call out here is that be largely focusing on penetration as against retention. So the more market you penetrate, the more you are going to be enjoying product market fit. So ICE theory can be used in conjunction with growth loops, and it kind of falls in a place where after you have done your market penetration, which is your product market fit, when you want to grow your product to the next level, that's where ICE theory is actually applicable. And there are three other things I want to bring. There's actually a fourth one as well, but there are three things, and the theory is also evolving as I write. So there are a couple of factors that you will see with infrequent products. So infrequent products, some of them are very macro factor resilient versus non-resilient. For instance, jobs is very closely tied to the economy. If economy tanks for whatever reason, your job as a category is going to have an impact. Similar to property, similar to cars. So there is a strong relation between macroeconomic factors and infrequent products. Penetrable versus non-penetrable, I spoke about this earlier. Impulsive versus deliberate, like sending a money in PayPal is super impulsive, versus deliberate is when you want to buy a car, you're going to be super deliberate about this. So infrequent products, given its high ticket item or infrequency, generally have the nature of being much more deliberate about this. So in the later part of the section, I argue as to how you should define the difficult decision making, because you can't make it any. I mean, I don't think you can make a property purchase simpler. It is a high involvement purchase, and it needs to be. But the question is, how can you aid the decision making during the process? Is what I will detail on later. The one other aspect you're not seeing here, which is there, is also seasonal versus non-seasonal. Some of them, like if you see property itself, there are times when you don't see property being actively pursued. Like let's say in countries like Indonesia, during the time of Ramadan, you'll not see that there are too many property purchases happening. So it goes on a low. And then there's the non-seasonal aspect where it comes up. And TurboTax, for instance, again, it's a great example. Tax is just a season. Tax doesn't happen perpetually. So we all wait for the tax season. And then once the tax season comes through, then you're pretty much on the peak and then you retract. So that's again a characteristic of the infrequent product. So let's look at this, the degree of infrequency. Mindful of time, I'm going to just wrap this up at the earliest. The degree of infrequency, again, just reminding everyone, we have different spectrum of infrequency. We have high infrequency on one side. We've got low infrequency with Expedia. So how do we manage this? The pitfalls of this is the more infrequent the product is, the lesser the recollection is. And that's a problem. If the rest of the recollection, the question is you're going to pay a ton to hire them back, which then impacts your bottom line. And also the question is also how do you then monetize them effectively? What's the LTV looking like? So to then counter the problem, the strategy is to move from infrequent to frequent. And if we do that, what you see is that it increases the penetrability in the market. The number of people who will be then relevant for the product kind of increases. So how do we then go from infrequency to frequency? So I'll just pause here. Any questions, any thoughts so far before I deep dive into the strategies? Anybody?
I mean, this is incredible. I'm just digesting it, but I'm sure we'll have some questions here in a little bit from Katrina. So
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, Katrina.
I love this, and I am new to an infrequent product, just having joined Apartment List, and so I really love this framework. The thing that I was thinking as you were speaking was there is difference in some way the density of the audience. So if you think about, like, if I'm looking for a job, it's possible that my colleagues are not looking for a job. But maybe if I'm dating, if I'm in the age of life where I'm dating, maybe a lot of my friends will be dating at the same time. And so there's kind of a virality around the density of kind of the audience. If
Yeah.
I am in college and then I'm looking for an apartment, if I'm in college and I'm looking for a job, I have a lot of people around me who are doing that. And so that does feel like the strategy. There's a strategy element to density of audience, or maybe you call it something else because you already have density, I think, in other places. That seems is really sticking out to me in terms of just looking at the examples that you're going through.
That's a great point, Katrina. And actually, I cover that a bit in the engagement side of things. But yeah, that's and engagement is where I deep dive into the word of mouth aspect, a bit of virality that is very specific for infrequent products. But your point is very valid. There are some products which naturally have the density and some that doesn't. So yeah, I'm just going to jump into the strategies. I'm going to quickly walk you through 3 strategies, and then I'll open it up for more questions and discussions as we go along. And interestingly, the first one I'm talking about is what Katrina just pointed out. So the first strategy concept is all about moving to timing known and easy to influence. So that's kind of the matrix that I work with. So if you were to look at most products that we operate on have easy to influence. They're either hard to influence or easy to influence, and the timing of transaction is known or unknown. So for instance, it is very difficult for you to know when someone is going to buy a property, when someone is going to be out for dating, when someone is going to look for a job. It's also hard to influence that. I can't go out and start persuading, let's say, Joe, hey, Joe, start looking for a job right now. I mean, he might be perfectly satisfied and is not going to yield to that request. So the timing of transaction of when Joe is going to be available in the market is unknown, and it will be hard to influence them in certain particular categories, right? And then if you see on the right hand side, there are easy to influence, and there's also a bit of timing of transaction known. So for instance, if I take travel, I can, if you're a regular traveler, to a certain degree of extent, I can predict, Guillermo is going to travel here in July. I kind of know that that's usually when he takes his vacation. And it's easy to influence because then I can send him a notification on deals or upcoming packages or whatever that is, which can help him. So if you look at the spectrum, there are different products in different buckets. And your strategy as a product person is then to move from anything on the left-hand side to the right-hand side, right? If you can transition from left-hand side of the equation where it's hard to influence, too easy to influence, then you are kind of making the game even more easier. Or better yet, if you can go from quadrant 4 to quadrant 1, where your timing of transaction is known, and if it's easy to influence, it's far, far better to be in a place there. So a live example of that is just Katrina just pointed about jobs. So LinkedIn, for instance, is a case study. If you were to look at it, that was a bunch of member profiles. They were just a job site, which was pretty hard to influence. From there, they transitioned into what you call as this user-generated content. And now it is for me far more easier to influence the consumers to both post something, and my timing of transaction is known. They might pretty much know that, Vivek has timed his post in Monday, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. That's kind of his time when he actually goes for a post. So it's kind of easy to influence, and timing of transaction is also a bit more known. So that's one strategy that you could employ actually when you migrate from left to right. The second thing is about focusing on the gap of interaction by introducing use cases. So one of the things that you might also want to look out is I also give you how easy it is to move from left to right. So this one is a hard one, although it's easy on the slides to say that go from left-hand side to the right-hand side. It takes a bit of trial and error for you to move really on this side. Then the next strategy that we're looking at also is adding use cases to reduce the gap of transaction or increase the frequency. Again, this is easy. I would say this is hard and medium to actually execute. So Zillow's Zestimate is a great example of this. So what they've done is if the purchase of property is very infrequent, they stay top of mind by ensuring this estimate is there with you. This is kind of a known case. So every quarter, possibly, if you engage with it, you know what your housing value is. The other thing that you see is also Airbnb during the pandemic actually introduced the Airbnb online experiences, which is another great asset. So instead of you doing the actual travel. In between that, you can have passive experiences across the world sitting in your couch through Airbnb online experiences. So one other way is actually adding adjacent use cases. The third one is what I call as latch on to a product, habit product, or layer a habit product. So if you talk about travel, which is extremely infrequent, I think that it's an ingenious stuff that they've done with tying up with a credit card, which is a habitual product. So when you kind of bind your travel with a credit card, every time you collect miles, every month when you're looking at your miles, you kind of getting reinforced on your travel plans. And that's a brilliant way for you to go towards the frequency as well. Another way is to, I don't know if you guys have heard about this Prof G's brand model. And I liked what he talked about, which is basically he talks as a clock model in branding, and he talks about pre-purchase, purchase, and post-purchase. And as a company or a product person, you decide where you want to dial up your product's experience, whether you want it to be in the post-purchase segment, you want to do it in the pre-purchase segment, and that gives you an ability to move towards infrequency. So if you add use cases, keeping the clock model in mind, it can help you navigate into frequency. So let's look at an example. Peloton is a great example. In the post-purchase segment. Now, what was just a one-time buy of your fitness equipment suddenly becomes a constant touch product where you're frequently engaging with the product with the on-demand training. And so what they did is they dialed up the post-purchase aspect of your purchase of your product. And I think that's worked really well for them. If you look at the numbers, the monthly workouts has been increasing, quarterly revenue has been increasing. Although the caveat here is that there's a bit of pandemic's role in that. You see the skyscrapers actually picking up after the pandemic. But nonetheless, I think that's a brilliant strategy to pursue, because now you're deliberately focusing on a fitness equipment now that has been transformed into something much more frequent product out there. A Peloton is a great case of constant touch, control over experience, and moving into frequency. There's another case which I talk about, pre-purchase product in Indian jewelry. I don't know how many of you know about this. India has a bit of, South India especially has a bit of fascination towards gold jewelry. So what they do is they go into this jeweler, and the jeweler has a different kind of scheme. So he'll say that, look, you can pay me 5,000 bucks INR, Indian rupees per month for the next 11 months. So, and the 12th month, I'm going to put in the same amount that you're giving me, which is, let's say, I'm going to put in 5,000. So end of the year, you've got 6,000 bucks to go out and purchase your jewelry, which is a fairly decent amount to look at. Or this could be in dollars in Singapore. This is 5,000 per month, right? That lands up to 550,000 INR. So 600,000 INR, which is a pretty decent amount for you to purchase the jewelry ending 1 year. And so that's again an infrequent product, but customers are kind of habituated to this on a monthly payment schedule. It's kind of a kind of inverse subscription, if you will, and that's working really well. That model has been working really well. So just sum it up: 3 strategies for you to move from frequency to infrequency. Timing should be much more known, and you should be able to influence, add an adjacent use case. And the third one is, this is an error. You need to latch onto a habit product or layer a habit product. And also the question is, when do you do this? When you're requiring next level of growth, like LinkedIn moved from jobs to UGC when they were actually looking for next level of growth. Adding adjacent use cases when you find that the hiatus between your visits are too long and you want to plug in something in between. And the third one is when you want to layer the habit aspect or latch onto a habit product will happen when you want to bump up your average revenue per user. That's kind of the time when you want to bring in this. Well, I think I've taken a lot of time already, so we've got 7 minutes and I'll stop here for questions.
This is incredible. Thank you so much for walking us through that. Hey, Katrina, did you want to jump back on, and Guillermo, if you had any questions?
I love this. I am going to watch this again. I'm going to definitely share this with a lot of my team and check out your Substack. Just so thankful for you taking the time to walk through it.
Thank you, Katrina.
I wanted to go back to one of the first things you said, just in terms of outcomes and switching, having the product team focused on outcomes versus output. That's something that I also believe is super important, and we're kind of in the midst of right now as we think about 2022. And there's definitely a shift that I need to make on my team in terms of the individual actions and even like the monthly type goals that we set, or the weekly goals, which we have like a weekly SMART goal, tends to be action oriented. The quarterly goal, or it tends to be about output, like at a weekly basis, we're on the output level. On a quarterly basis, we're at the outcome level. I just wanted to hear more about how you bridge that gap between those two things. And for two reasons. One, for the people on the team, but also there's a perception from my peers where it's like, well, product is all about output. We care about outcomes. You need to get on the outcome train. And I just want to make sure that we are sort of managing both internally how we're working as well as the external expectations.
Yeah, that's a great point, Katrina. I went through all these issues as well. Look, I think I think you're already making great progress when I hear about this in terms of the weekly goals and the monthly goals. We're not in. We have a slightly different approach, but I'd love to learn about this approach that you've talking about. But a couple of changes. I mean, I'll tell you what my problem was, and then I'll possibly articulate the issues, and let me know if you guys had the same issues as well. The first problem was the artifact that I used for communicating the product was a product roadmap, which is a much more output-centric document as against an outcome-centric document. So for me, I felt like that was one of the issues, because the more I showed them, and as a creature of habit, these, all the leaders were possibly asking the question as to, okay, when is it coming, more than what is this going to move? How is this going to move the needle for us? So that was one bucket. The second bucket of issues that I had was more around how do product managers or product people, designers and engineers including, how would they then think about architecting towards an outcome? Can they break down a goal into subparts and say that, okay, this product will give me X amount of output, or that product is going to give me X amount of output? For me, the question was, they didn't have the muscle. I assumed they did. So when I slapped the goal on them, I found them to struggle a bit more. And so eventually we had to backtrack, give them the tools and amenities to do that. So that's kind of the second problem that I face. And largely the third is about that mindset and the shift in culture itself. Does this resonate, Katrina? Is this something very similar to what you're facing?
Yeah, and it's different for different teams, but generally it comes easier in certain places and harder in others.
Yeah, correct. And I had the same thing as well, different in different teams, and the nature of the product sometimes yields in much more easily. Like for instance, my monetization team, easier to look at the outcome, far more measurable, whereas something like such as an experience team, the outcomes are far more the outcomes are defined, but it takes a bit of time to kind of get it right in terms of the right outcomes that you're looking at. So a couple of things that worked in our favor was, the first one is we changed the artifact from roadmap to commitments. I don't know if you've heard Ravi's spiel on narratives and commitments. If you've not, I strongly recommend you go through it. I'm a big fan of it. The word commitment itself kind of gives you a lot more accountability. The language changes, the mindset changes. And ever since we've gone down that path, it has kind of retrained the execs to kind of ask the right questions in our team. So the artifact itself was changed. We no longer talk about a roadmap. We go into what Ravi calls as narratives and commitments. So we kind of give them a narrative around what is that we accomplished in the last quarter or last month, and what do we want to do in this month, and what are the bunch of commitments, both discovery and delivery commitments that we're doing. So that has helped us kind of anchor the commitment perspective into the product team, also the training the external stakeholders on the outcome. The second part that we introduced was so one of the issues that I found was the product managers were struggling really to articulate the to break down the goals into subcomponents. The second issue that I found was, in the name of lean startup, the experimentations run did not have, they did not stay in a problem for long or in an opportunity for long. They will experiment something, they'll dismiss that this is not the right experiment, they'll jump off to something else. So these were some of the problems I faced. So what we kind of rolled out is this, the driver tree, or something where what Teresa Torres calls as the opportunity solution tree, very similar to that. I think that is an incredible way for us to bring the teams together, for us to review, like, what's the outcome? What are the key opportunities are you chasing? Is this a big enough opportunity for you to focus on? Why do you think it's a big enough opportunity to focus on? Are there any other evidences in the past research that shows that this is a good opportunity to focus on? And once you're aligned on the opportunity, you handshake with the team and you step back, because then they can do a bunch of solutions and experimentations around it to come back to you to tell you that, look, I think we experimented on this opportunity really gave us, was really helpful for us because we could create the impact. On the contrary, sometimes they could come back and say that, look, in spite of our best attempts, we are not able to crack this opportunity, time to move on to the next one. I think that was kind of a pivotal moment for us. Once we adopted that, monthly reviews of these OSTs has been very, very useful for us, where we all of us are on the same page. I can provide my steer as to how the team is doing, and then we go on to hit the goals. So on the commitments focus, we do a weekly check-in on the commitments. If you're okay with the commitments that is committed, what amount of confidence, where they are in terms of their percentage to get there. And OST, the opportunity solution tree, was a way for us to kind of put everybody on the same page in terms of the map that we're navigating towards the outcome.
Really interesting, super helpful. If you were able to find a link to Ravi describing the commitment framework and put it either in the chat here or in the post, the follow-up post, I would love to read more from the source.
Yeah, I'll actually send it to over in the community, and I'll include it in the details list too when I upload the recording.
And the opportunity solution tree I'm familiar with, but we definitely should include that link as well, because that's a great one.
This one, the tree.
Yep.
Yes.
So this is what we look at. So, like example, so look, I think this is one of the teams which says this is our goal. We want to hit by this time, and then we will do this by these are the drivers and levers that we've got. Increase the number of agents who have purchased at least once, repeat purchase, and the transaction value of the purchase. And then what we've done is we've plotted the tree, like for instance, increase the awareness of the traffic, increase the awareness in traffic. Underneath that, what are the solutions and experiments that you will run? Similarly, let's say, drive the adoption, first-time purchases, and what are the opportunities that you see? And what you're seeing is overall the box that is being boxed around this. And as long as I'm okay with the opportunities, I step back and the team then works on this solutions and experiments, and they keep iterating on this up until they come back and tell me that we couldn't move the needle here, but we were able to move the needle here.
So cool to see it visualized. I took up all the question time, sorry, Guillermo and Joe.
No, just very quick, Viveck, really, really interesting. It has been really inspiring. How do you manage all things, and based on what you wrote on the post that you posted on the community one, I actually have been able to talk to some investors about it and make them understand how infrequent products actually are measured, how to actually address the product market fit. So it's been really, really helpful. And the presentation you just did now, it's great. So it will be great to just review it over and over again to be able to put all the juice available there.
Thank you, Guillermo. Very kind.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna have to watch this recording multiple times myself to digest it all too. So this is incredible. So yeah, thanks again for joining us here today. Last but not least, before we wrap things up, where can we keep up with you?
Look, LinkedIn is a good place, and I think all my thoughts will be now shared through. I've started writing much more regularly, so I think blog is another place where you can keep in touch with any of these things. So there's a couple of other content coming up. I've just finished the product market fit. The next is about customer empathy. That's a tricky one as well, which is one I'm now working on. So yeah, LinkedIn is a great place to be. To stay connected.
Awesome. Well, definitely looking forward to the post coming up here because this is definitely super helpful. So yeah, thanks again for joining us, and thanks for the great questions.
Thank you, everyone.